So now that we're at the 246 mark, let's talk about HR1 if we're good with this one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to hear about HR1.
Yeah, and I want to preface this just a little bit just for other people. HR1 is, we're all going to learn about this together. Well, Colin has done more research than I have, but I have paid very little attention to this because I did not give it credence. But
At its inception, we thought it was so ridiculous, there's no way it would ever become a reality.
Yes. And you said it has since passed the House.
And
it's
passed the House.
Is on its way to the
multiple
Senate.
sessions.
Is extremely unlikely to be passed in the Senate, but it's possible. It's also received an immense amount of focus. The Biden administration is receiving increasing amounts of pressure about it. It is being framed largely as it's a voting rights bill. It's about preserving voting rights.
Yep.
If you're listening to conservatives, they're saying it's not about voting rights. It has nothing to do with that. I don't know, so we're going to learn about it together here so that we can see what the truth is.
So HR1, and as if we all recall how bills are numbered and named.
House Resolution 1.
Which means it's the first bill adopted at the beginning of each legislative session. And it has been HR1 since 2016, I believe, and it still is. It's always the number one there. It's right in there. And it is colloquially known as the For the People Act.
Yes.
Because they always have, technically it's just called HR1, and then they give it a subtitle, which is the For the People Act.
For the people.
And if you listen to the media, and if you just are intaking what is coming out of the mainstream, you know this as a voting rights bill. It protects people's ability to vote. It stops voter suppression and all this stuff. It allows the maximum amount of people to vote. Now, how it does this is it seizes control from the states in it's not a complete seizure of their ability to lay out how they vote. Because as we all should know, if you are a voting member of the United States, you should understand that your voting laws are set forth through your state legislature, because states hold the power to determine how they run elections, including in federal elections.
As per the Constitution.
As per the Constitution. And so the way I want to go about this, because HR1 is also 800 pages long, so obviously we're not going to go through the whole thing.
Aren't they always?
Exactly, because they make them so large and incomprehensible that the average person they have zero chance of actually understanding what's in there.
Yeah.
And if you're pretty used to reading bills, even then, you still will have a hard time doing it, because most of what they do is changes to other laws. They say, okay, strike this word, insert this word, change this paragraph to this paragraph in this section, go see that U.S. code, blah, blah, blah. 800 fucking pages of that, generally. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break out two different perspectives from two different networks, I guess you'd say, two different ideologically opposed institutions. One of which is Vox.com, VOX, which is obviously going to be taking the stance of, they're going to be highlighting what they think is good about the bill. And then I've pulled up the lovely Heritage Foundation, which is going to tear this thing apart, because the Heritage Foundation is a very conservative think tank, and Vox is a very progressive media outlet.
Let's do it.
So we're going to go ahead and start with Vox. And they're going to go ahead and pull out what's in the bill, and they kind of take some of their main points out of here. So the bill itself is broken into three basic sections. There's a voting rights section, there's a campaign finance section, and then there's an ethics section. And I
don't want the government telling me what ethics are.
Yeah, I mean, right?
That doesn't seem like...
Well, it's ethics as far as voting laws.
I don't trust the ethics of anybody serving in government.
So from Vox.com, their bullet points under voting rights: creates a new national automatic voter registration that asks voters to opt out rather than opt in, ensuring more people will be signed up to vote. Requires chief state election officials to automatically register eligible unregistered citizens. Requires each state to put online option for voter registration, correction, cancellation, or designating party affiliation. Requires at least 15 consecutive days of early voting for federal elections, early voting sites would be open for at least 10 hours per day. The bill also prohibits states from restricting a person's ability to vote by mail and requires states to prepay postage on return envelopes for mail-in voting.
Can I just interrupt you just for a
Yes.
second? There's been a lot of talk, because that reminds me, a lot of talk of this combating the voting bills or the election bills that are being passed in 30 states, 40 states, something like that. A bunch of states are changing the way that they're doing their elections because they're concerned about the way that last year turned out.
Yes.
And this is, and I just want to say this just kind of as like a base to outline what you're talking about. The conservative aspect of this that's taking so much issue with this, I feel, is largely rooted in the 10th Amendment, and then much after that, that actually talks about elections in this. But the 10th Amendment, for anybody who doesn't know, right?
Reading directly from the United States Constitution.
Directly from the Constitution, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So at the time when this was written, there was only 10 amendments. It was only the Bill of Rights. So anything not covered in 1 through 9 is left to the states.
Yep.
Right? And so also, voting rights and elections are laid out in the Constitution of how they're supposed to go down roughly, and then it's left roughly, and then it's fine-tuned in the states.
Yep.
So
it's basically you can't prohibit anybody from voting unless they're a felon or blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And that's about it. So next on the list, establish independent redistricting commissions in states as a way to draw new congressional districts and end partisan gerrymandering in federal elections.
And we saw just a few years ago, 2 years ago maybe, there was a Supreme Court case referring to gerrymandering that ruled that partisan gerrymandering was in fact inherently part of the political process laid out in the Constitution. And
part of
as
the deal.
shitty as it was and as dirty as it was, that's part of the jam. It's constitutional, at least for now, and you just should put better people in charge of your elections, really is kind of what they said.
So there's another thing. Totally unconstitutional right there.
Oh, yes.
So then the next one we got prohibits voter roll purging and bans the use of non-forwardable mail being used as a way to remove voters from rolls. Restores voting rights to people convicted of felonies who have completed their sentences. However, the bill doesn't restore rights to felons currently serving sentences in a correctional facility.
Well, at least there's that. I mean, like Bernie Sanders wanted to let people in prison vote and shit like that. And
And I mean, I think we've talked about that a little bit. I think I'm roughly on board with that. I think once you do your time,
certainly once you've done your time,
you should get your rights back.
You in prison.
You know,
you ain't got shit to do with what's going on out here anyway.
So then we move into campaign finance.
Also, you murdered somebody, so fuck you.
Exactly right. Establishes public funding of campaigns, powered by small donations. This has long been somebody's vision. The federal Serbane's vision.
I don't
probably
know.
One of the authors of the bill.
Yeah.
The federal government would provide a voluntary 6-to-1 match for candidates for president and Congress. 6-to-1 match. Which means for every dollar a candidate raises for small donations, the federal government would match it 6 times over. The maximum small donation that could be matched would be capped at $200. This program isn't funded by taxpayer dollars. Instead, the money would come from adding a 4.75% fee on criminal and civil fines, fees, penalties, or settlements with banks and corporations that commit corporate malfeasance, and they reference Wells Fargo. So they're going to have new fines, new taxes for getting in trouble, and that's how they're going to pay for their 6-to-1 matching of small-time donations.
In what world should the federal government be funding people's campaigns to run for federal office?
6 times over, buddy. Okay, next, supports a constitutional amendment to end Citizens United.
Hey, I fuck with that, though.
So that's 2 out of how many bullet points so
far?
Fuck
a corporation.
And then we got passes the Disclose Act, which is another act within the
David
Greater
Cicilline.
Bill. Yep, pushed by David Cicilline and Sheldon Whitehouse.
Racist?
Both Democrats from Rhode Island, who, Whitehouse just got popped for being essentially part of what they...
He is part of a whites-only club,
Yep.
or that only has whites that are
Yes.
like
well, we've
it's-
had African American members before. We just don't now.
Stop. And that's.
Oh.
Did you see the clip from? Just to interrupt you for a second.
Okay.
Did you see the clip? I think I watched. I can't remember what I watched now, but it was a clip from Rising, and the new Rising, and.
So bad.
I watched it on Twitter. That's where I got it from. And they had a reporter on to talk about Sheldon Whitehouse and all this shit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them said, it was obviously two of the more left-leaning people that were on there. And then they said, can you imagine if, Donald Trump, if it had come out that Donald Trump was part of a whites-only, country club and blah, blah, blah. And after she was interrupted like 4 times, she's like, oh, actually, in the 90s, Donald Trump, or I think it was the 90s,
Yes.
Donald Trump sued the state because he was being fucked over for...
State of Florida.
Yeah, because he was the only club that allowed Jews and blacks in there.
Yep.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So they brought her on for their panel segment type things that they
Yes.
do, and they just bullshitted with each other, shitting on Donald Trump for 4 or 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And then she was like, guys, if I can interject here, let me drop this piece of fire on you, and then thank you, good night, end of segment. That's what Rising is nowadays. It is a total cluster F shit show.
Fucking in
So,
3 weeks.
3
weeks
dude.
from
Boom.
one of the best shows on YouTube to absolute dog shit
Yep.
garbage.
Which shows the power of Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty.
Yeah.
And why I love and I cannot wait payday to roll around, because I am subscribing so quick, because I have realized
Locked
now.
it in, huh?
Because
Locked
we
it
did.
in.
We locked it in.
Locked it in, baby.
I started listening to their podcast because I'm not a member of their thing, right? And the only full episode I think they've released on their YouTube was their one they did with Joe Rogan, for obvious reasons. But I've noticed that right after their breaking points, with their what's on your radar thing,
they still say that
stop.
sometimes. What's on your radar?
You hear it fade out, and then they go to like their panel discussion. So I'm like, I'm still missing content here, so I gotta subscribe, and it's bothering me. So, anyways, the reason behind passing the Disclose Act, they say this would require super PACs and quote unquote dark money political organizations to make their donations public.
Sheldon Whitehouse, to his credit, is, okay, to his partial credit, because he also takes shitty money to find out, but he is a real stickler for dark money. He's like very adamant on it. I can't really get into it. I don't have all the specifics, but I remember reading an article, something about Sheldon and Whitehouse takes money from, not from super PACs, but by groups that are funded by conglomeration of other groups.
And the reason I think Vox just says we're going to pass the Disclose Act, and then they go into this thing, is because once we get through into the Heritage Foundation ones, they speak about what that actually entails.
That's why.
Because let's just say there's some empowerment of the IRS to do some looking into political leanings. So then we go on to passes the Honest Ads Act, championed by Senator Klobuchar and Mark Warner of Virginia, which would require Facebook and Twitter to disclose the source of money for political ads on their platforms and share how much money was spent. And this is more or less in response to all the rubles they took during the 2016 campaigns.
Yeah.
And then we go, discloses any political spending by government contractors and slows the flow of foreign money into the elections by targeting shell companies. Don't know how you do that again, but that's okay. Restructures the Federal Election Commission to have 5 commissioners instead of 6 in order to break political gridlock at the organization.
This is just to put it in context, a lot. If you're listening to any conservative media, you're going to hear that point be covered as like an attempt to politicize, weaponize the FEC. Which, certainly there's an argument made for that.
Oh, yeah.
Because somebody has to have the 3 and somebody has to have the 2. So somebody has to come out on top if in an odd number. So
Just like the Supreme Court.
the FEC is supposed to be a completely unbiased body, and that's why there's a bipartisan panel on there so that no one has any more
Yes,
power
so
than the other one.
So you can't have a majority.
Yes.
That's why. And then lastly, under their campaign finance reform is prohibits any coordination between candidates and super PACs,
Yeah,
which
good luck
I
with
can
that.
totally get behind, because as I think we know, oh no, I'm talking super delegates. But yeah,
Fuck
good
a
luck
super
with that
PAC
is what I'm
too.
saying. I'm down with that.
Yeah.
And then under ethics, requires the president and vice president to disclose 10 years of his or her tax returns. Candidates for president and vice president must also do the same. So once you decide that you're going to declare your candidacy, you have to then, as a
As a
non-politician,
private citizen.
you're a private citizen, are being forced to disclose your finances for 10 years to the public.
And we've talked about this, obviously, when Donald Trump was in office, that he did, and he disclosed some of them, say he was under audit for most of the other ones. And it's not, prior to this, obviously, it's not a requirement. It's a thing that everyone did, but it's not a requirement. You don't have to. It's
lame.
yeah,
It's lame.
this is a direct hit at Donald Trump.
Yes, it is. Where was I? Campaign.
Or a direct attack. He don't give a shit. This
Yeah.
ain't a hit. It missed. He doesn't give a shit.
Then it stops members of Congress from using taxpayer money to settle sexual harassment or discrimination cases.
Well, that's good.
That is good because both parties are definitely guilty of that. Gives the Office of Government Ethics the power to do more oversight and enforcement and implement stricter lobbying registration requirements. These include more oversight of foreign agents by the Foreign Agents Registration Act.
That's also a hit at Donald Trump.
Yes, it is.
Pretty much all these ethics.
Yeah, a lot of these are. And then creates a new ethics code for the U.S. Supreme Court, ensuring all branches of government are impacted by the new law. So they want to make sure that everybody's going to get
This
is
code of
across
ethics
the
is
board.
across the board.
So that's
Vox.
That's Vox's take on this,
'Kay.
right? Now we're going to switch into the Heritage Foundation, and we probably won't go through all of them because they are much more extensive about it, but we'll
Yeah.
get through as many as we feel like. So we'll just start at the
I
top.
got a couple of videos I want to play for infrastructure,
Okay.
but just before we go.
Okay. Yeah, we're sitting about
We
3
got
right
time.
now.
You're totally fine.
So what does HR1 do, they say? Seizes the authority of states to regulate voter registration and the voting process by forcing states to implement early voting, automatic voter registration, same-day registration, online voter registration, and no-fault absentee balloting, which is true.
Yes.
Fox just said that. Make it easier to commit fraud and promote chaos at the polls through same-day registration. So they're just reiterating the same thing, and they're going back to
Obviously, a more aggressive
the
manner.
last. Yeah, they're rather
Makes
aggressive.
it easier
when
to
they-
commit fraud and promote chaos.
Well, because the implication
so
there is
funny.
there is in every election the amount of fraud is not going to be zero,
Right.
and so now you add more people participating in the vote, it is going to raise the number of fraud cases. Not to say that that number is going to increase the likelihood of the fraud taking place to actually have an outsized effect on the election. But let's see. Hurt voter turnout through 15 days of mandatory early voting. And then they go ahead and make the case that with all that those extra days, voters aren't going to be pressured to get out and vote. So they just take their time, and next thing you know, it'll be over with.
Which, if you're in the Biden administration, was part of the winning strategy this time around, was all the people that you got to get out and vote. More people voted, supposedly, more people voted in this election than any election ever before.
Yeah, that's
So-
what the numbers say. Which is, and Joe Biden got more votes than any president in the United States in the history of the United States. Then we degrade the accuracy of registration list by requiring states to automatically register all individuals as opposed to citizens from state and federal databases such as State Department of Motor Vehicles, Corrections and Welfare Offices, and federal agencies such as the Social Security Administration, Department of Labor, and Federal Bureau of Prisons, and the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services of the Department of Health and Human Services. This would register large numbers of ineligible voters, including aliens, and cause multiple or duplicate registrations of the same individuals and put federal agency in charge of determining a person's domicile for voting purposes. That's what happens when you federalize everything. That's what is happening. And they're making the case that obviously, all the illegal immigrants, blah, 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 they're all going to be in here. Criminals that aren't supposed to be voting, felons and all that, they're going to automatically be on the list. Some of which I believe is hyperbole.
The federal government is not made to handle everything all the time.
It is not. Constitute a recipe for massive voter registration fraud by hackers and cyber criminals through online voter registration. That's a good point. I don't know if the federal government has the capability of keeping that secure, but who knows? Requires states to count ballots cast
They
by
can't even
voters.
stop people from doing like phishing emails and shit.
No, they
so
can't.
I don't.
I don't understand how that's going to work out.
You can't stop an old man from clicking on a phishing email. How are you going to stop this?
We require states to count ballots cast by voters outside of their assigned precincts. Okay. Mandate no-fault absentee ballots, which are the tool of choice for vote thieves. It would ban witness signature or notarization requirements for absentee ballots. Force states to accept absentee ballots
And
and
we-
to receive up to 10 days after Election Day.
We did see this. I can definitely say this on YouTube because that one bitch is in jail. We did see in. Man, I gotta really tiptoe around this one. That sucks.
Welcome to YouTube.
Yeah, there was one woman in particular that I know she got hemmed up, and so I know I can talk about her in Texas.
Yep.
Who was paying people for their votes,
And it was
She
on a local level.
Yes. She was ballot harvesting. She was
Mm-hmm.
paying people for their votes. There was other allegedly other instances
Allegedly.
that were allegedly covered by Project Veritas. Allegedly they had video fucking evidence of homeboy holding handfuls of ballots, which is federally illegal.
So that's fun.
That's so weird.
Bans state voter ID laws. So that's the thing. I mean, why would anybody... The most common argument for that one is we require ID for a lot of different things throughout our daily lives.
Yes.
You buy weed, show your ID. Buy alcohol, show your ID. Buy nicotine, show your ID. Go into a bar, show your ID to prove
Get pulled
that you're
over.
able.
Show your ID.
Exactly. But you don't need your ID to vote because it's racist.
Not in every state. In some states you do.
Well, yeah. And they're going to get rid of that if HR1 passes. Violates the First Amendment.
Which is racist as fuck.
Oh, it's so racist.
Most of
To say black people are incapable of getting a photo ID is about one of the most racist things I've ever heard escape from Joe Biden's mouth. Other than his statement about white kids are just as...
No.
Oh, no,
Poor
what was it?
kids
Poor
are just
kids-
as capable as white kids.
Yes, poor kids are just as capable as white kids.
He also,
Thank you.
yeah, they're.
Racist.
I think one of the best change my mind Steven Crowder did was that last one about voter ID, and it was opposing voter ID as racist. And there wasn't a single argument anybody posed that wasn't based in black people being unable to do something that everybody else has the perfect capability to do,
Including...
racist as fuck.
Yes, including those individuals now. They still do. They are still capable of that today, which is why saying they can't is racist as fuck. Where are we? Violate the First Amendment with respect to a vast range of legal activity. Voter intimidation or coercion that prevents some from registering or voting is already a federal crime under the Voting Rights Act and the National Voter Registration Act, but HR1 would add a provision criminalizing, quote, hindering, interfering, or preventing, end quote, anyone from registering or voting, which is so vague and so broad that it could prevent providing any
that's
information
sketchy.
to the election official about the ineligibility of an individual, such as an applicant not being a U.S. citizen. So in other words, there's no ability to determine who is voting.
You might get hemmed up if you tell someone, I know for a fact that guy is not a citizen,
Yeah, you can't do that.
but he's voting right now.
Yep.
You might get hemmed up.
So
Or
then-
fined at the very least.
Yeah. And then
That's
we
no good.
expand regulation and government censorship of campaigns and political activity and speech, including online and policy-related speech. HR1 would impose onerous legal and administrative
Onerous.
compliance burdens and costs on candidates, citizens, civil groups, unions, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. Many of these provisions violate the First Amendment, protect incumbents, and reduce the accountability of politicians. And I believe what they're talking there is the Disclose Act and the removing of Citizens United, because
Works.
that is how a lot of these PACs are able to operate in the spheres they do.
Yeah.
Go down, reduce the number of federal election commission members from 6 to 5, allowing political party with 3 commission seats to control the commission, which we just talked about. prohibits state election officials from participating in federal elections, and impose numerous other quote-unquote ethics rules that are unconstitutional or unfairly restrict political activity, eliminating the ability of the residents of specific states to make their own decisions about what rules should govern their state government officials. Requires states to restore the ability of felons to vote, which is something that we've talked about before, and they, obviously Heritage Foundation is very opposed to that at all.
Right.
So that's kind of typical from them.
Obviously, they've never been arrested before.
Hey, look at that. Transfer the right to draw congressional districts from state legislators to independent, quote-unquote, commissions whose members are unaccountable to voters. HR1 would make it a violation of federal law to engage in, quote-unquote, partisan redistricting and mandate the inclusion of alien population, both legal and illegal, in all redistricting. This is an anti-democratic, unconstitutional measure that would take away the ability for the citizens of the state to make their own decisions about redistricting. And this is very, very, very correct.
I'll tell you what, if there's one thing the government can't do, it's find somebody who's impartial to anything. So
that's a good point. Because that's the big thing, is the gerrymandering, right, which is the redrawing of voting districts, is done on the state level because the states run their elections. And so the federal government has no say in what the state districts are. They just accept them for what they are, and that's their voting district. But they want to get in there and be able to have some nonpartisan commission draw the lines, which is asinine.
I'm sure we talked at least a little bit about this on our social media. I am at Salt of the Street on Twitter and at alpaca_Donovan on Instagram. And Colin is at Big Bird Offie on both of those things. We also have our YouTube. You're watching us on YouTube at Salt of the Streets. We have our Instagram at Salt of the Streets, our Facebook, fuck Facebook, at Salt of the Streets. You can find all us at saltofthestreets.com. If you are in Bremerton and you need a skateboard, go to Location Skate Shop. If you need a haircut, go down and see Swab Blended. If you need some donuts, hit up Dude's Donuts.
Basically anywhere in the county.
Pretty much anywhere in the county.
Very accessible locations.
You can listen to us on any podcast platform, and if you go ahead and leave us a rating and a review, and if you do, send us a screenshot. We'll send you a free signed t-shirt to wherever you are at, anywhere in the globe, baby.
This is very true. We have the capability. We have the technology.
We have the power.
So this one I love. Authorize the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, to engage in partisan activity. HR1 would permit the IRS to investigate and consider the political and policy positions of nonprofit organizations before granting tax-exempt status, thus enabling IRS officials to target organizations engaging in First Amendment activity with disfavored views. Exactly what Barack Obama did during his term. He mandated the IRS start looking into conservative 501c3s, nonprofit corporation, by going after the conservative ones. It's the same exact thing, and now this is just codifying it in law. If this thing passes, the IRS will look in. If you want to register a nonprofit, the IRS is going to look into whether or not what your political leanings are and decide whether or not you can have tax-exempt status based off your political leanings.
What the fuck?
Right? Seems slightly unconstitutional. Freedom of assembly? I don't know. Freedom of association?
It's definitely biased, that's for sure.
It's kind of a problem. Not to mention the IRS is filled with unelected bureaucrats.
Also, yeah, it's dangerous because we talk about this all the time, especially on a executive level. When you implement things like that, you might like the dude who's in charge of the IRS then, but what about in 10 years if you really don't like him?
Yep.
And he goes after your charity, because every president starts a charity when they get out of office. And they're like, what? That, not only do I think that's dumb. That's really dumb. That's very, very stupid.
Yep. I mean, there is a greater than average chance that we will have another single-term president. You pass this.
Yeah.
And in 2024, a Republican comes back in, and that if you do not think that weapon is going to be wielded against you, you are an ignoramus.
Ignoramus.
Good word.
Yeah.
All right, we got two more. Limited access to federal courts for anyone challenging HR1. The bill would prohibit the filing of any lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of HR1 anywhere except in district court or the District of Columbia, and would allow the court to order all plaintiffs and intervenors, I don't know that legal term, probably intervention people, regardless of their number, such as all 50 states, to file joint papers or to be represented by a single attorney at oral arguments, severely limiting the legal representation and due process rights of challengers. And I don't know if that's just because it's a federal law, which means you have to fight it in federal court, which has to be done through your state federal courts and on up. And so I don't know if that's what they're hinting at there, but doesn't sound good. Anytime it's more difficult to legally fight a law, generally a bad idea, because it limits the everyday normal person's ability to fight back against
any lawsuits. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to interrupt
yeah.
you. Filing the lawsuit of any challenging the constitution of I don't.
Except in the district court for the District of Columbia.
So you have to either travel to D.C. if you live in another state, if you're an attorney from another state, even a state attorney from another state, you have to travel to D.C. I don't even know, does it work like that, or do you have to find someone who lives in D.C. like a lawyer who's registered in D.C.? I don't even know how that works.
See, that I think we have a problem with breaking this one down because we're not lawyers. I would imagine that essentially you just have to file your complaint in that district court.
And then fucking go there and
Yep.
take time off to argue a case that could potentially take months and months or fucking years. That's...
And then it establishes a commission, a quote, commission to protect democratic institutions, end quote, that would threaten the independence of the judiciary. HR1 defines democratic institutions as those that are essential to ensuring an independent judiciary, free and fair elections, and the rule of law. The commission would be given the authority to compel judges to testify and justify their legal decisions, threatening their independent judgment and subjecting them to political pressure and harassment.
That's like the other day when Ibram X. Kendi defined racism by using racism.
Yeah.
Like, that's garbage. Those are just word soup that you put into a bill to be like, it's, anything that helps us ensure an independent judiciary, free and fair elections. Anything that does that is a democratic institution. Yep. Like, what the fuck?
So, I think in the very, very broadest of strokes, HR1 centralizes federal elections. It removes the power of states in at least a specific capacity to write their own laws about how they carry out their elections, draw their own legislative districts, and it would probably be done at that level, but it forces everybody in the United States to automatically become a registered voter, which removes, once again, like we had talked about way before, might have even been in the pre-show, removing one more responsibility required of citizens to uphold their constitutional right to vote.
Yeah, which you could certainly argue is a good thing, but you could also argue is not a good thing.
Yeah, I don't like it. So, HR1, what are your thoughts, buddy?
Why don't?
It's a lot.
We'll start at the small, right? Yes. We'll start at the small so that we can see. I think that might be a good way. Fucking 3 years in, still toying with like layout and shit. But I think it might be a good idea to like give an idea of the lens that I'm seeing something through. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it's unconstitutional, right, at the face. I don't think that it's a good idea. When I watched 2020, I said to Josh Keaton, he was one of the people that I was talking to through the election. I was like, it's surprising to me that there isn't some type of uniformed way that we all have to do elections, But I don't feel like it's like, I don't know. It's almost too late to do it now. You shouldn't do it now because it's too late. You got to just figure out how we're doing it. Like, it's not like I'm hard pressed to be of the mindset that we just get to a point that like, well, this just doesn't work for us anymore.
Yeah.
Like, no, figure it the fuck out, get it done. Like, there is definitely a way to do this correctly because we've just done it for the last 200 years and it's not been a goddamn problem. So what's the issue now?
Yeah. What is driving this?
People unable to separate themselves from their own partisan biases to get the goddamn election done because it's what's right for the country. Um, that's a
It's a tough pill to swallow.
that's a dangerous game to be playing.
And it's the real problem I think we're facing here is we have been confronted very recently with the difficulties. Oh my God, she's making a turnover.
This
Or what do you
is-
call that? Braided pastry.
This is a cream
fantastic.
cheese and strawberry jam puff pastry that she's bringing tonight. She made the
Oh.
strawberry jam herself yesterday.
Bro.
She also made the puff pastry herself.
No, of course she did. I know what it takes to make a puff pastry. A pastry dough
Yes.
is a long, arduous process. You roll it out, you lay the butter on it, you fold it, you roll it, you lay the butter on it, you roll it, you fold it, and in between those you got to refrigerate it.
Yep.
It
So if
is
the butter
a
breaks
process.
down, it's not flaky like it's supposed to be.
Yep, and then you got dough. Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Your wife is an amazing baker.
I'm so excited.
I am too.
So say she's bringing that
I
to
get
Jake's
to
tonight.
partake.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
More to look forward to.
Well,
man.
this is definitely something that I'll be paying much more attention to.
Yes.
Um,
And I forgot. After we broke it down, there
Yes.
was movement on HR1, which is why we're talking about this again, because it has passed the House consecutively since the Democrats have had a supermajority in the House. Well, not even a supermajority, but enough to pass it in the House. The problem lies is getting it through the Senate, because the Senate is split 50-50 with
Yep.
Kamala Harris bringing the 51st vote
you
in.
need the 60.
You need the 60. And the idea there is you need to get 10 Republicans to vote for this thing, which I don't think they will. At this point, it doesn't look
No.
like anybody will.
No, not when it's the Republican states that are passing the laws that this is created to
Yes.
combat, you know?
Yes. Which then leads you to the next conversation of, if this is so important, the next move they're going to have to do is legislative filibuster in the Senate.
Right, which has been brought up on a couple of different
And that's the scary
sections.
part.
When you're talking about this, you're talking about the American Family Plan that they're trying to do, and we'll talk about that just for a few minutes because the infrastructure thing is still pretty small right now.
Yeah.
Because a quote unquote deal was only announced like 2 days ago. So we'll get into it in more detail when a deal is actually put out. Right now, what we have is kind of like frameworks for what they said they're going to do.